Listen up. The Trump administration is trying to handpick the lawyers who will defend migrant children from its own deportation machine. What can go wrong there? A catastrophic amount is the answer. The administration has been awarding contracts to groups with almost no experience in immigration law. None. Very notably, these groups have deep ties to the Trump administration. There are 24,000 or so unaccompanied migrant children in the United States, and they currently face deportation. Federal law directs the government to ensure that they have legal representation. And according to government data, most of these kids are not in detention centers. About 1,800 of them are in government shelters. The rest, around 22,000, are living with sponsors. That's what their lawyers say, like an uncle or a grandparent. And while their cases are making their way through the immigration system, some of them are teenagers, some of them are toddlers, and they're being detained and deported at rates that are faster than ever before. According to ProPublica, unaccompanied kids are being removed at about 3 times the rate they were during the final years of Donald Trump's first term. Hearings are being moved up by weeks, even months in some cases. And what does that do? It makes it nearly impossible for a child to get a lawyer in time. Keep in mind, the vast majority of these kids, and when I say vast majority, I mean almost everybody, have no criminal history. So who did this administration choose to guard the hen house? A very, very hungry wolf, so to speak. Earlier this month, the Trump administration announced its intent to award a small Houston law firm called the Burke Law Group a contract worth up to $150 million to represent all of those kids. There was no competitive bidding. And this is not a traditional legal aid organization. It's a law firm with almost no immigration experience, according to its own website, by the way, and deep ties to the Trump administration. One of the founders, Marcella Burke, served in Trump's first administration at the EPA and at the Interior Department. Jeffrey Hall, former Burke Law employee and founding partner, is serving in the Trump administration right now in that same EPA. At Hall's confirmation hearing, Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse called him, this is a quote, a MAGA zealot. Only 2 of the firm's roughly 24 attorneys actually practice immigration law. 2 of 24. That's according to their own website again. The firm's work had focused primarily on environmental matters, regulatory matters. The Burke Law Firm did not respond to comment from multiple news outlets. So, a firm with almost no immigration practice, founded by Trump allies, one of whom is literally inside the administration right now, tapped to represent kids whose cases could determine whether they remain in this country or not. So ask yourself this question. What happens when you replace experienced immigration lawyers with an organization that has little to no experience doing this kind of work? Do you really expect these new lawyers to fight aggressively for these children as they are supposed to? Or do you end up with something much closer to what Trump's government, what Stephen Miller, what they all wanted in the first place? A pipeline from the courtroom to deportation. Now, here's what happened to the kids' previous lawyers. For nearly 2 decades, a nonprofit called Acacia, Center for Justice, made up of nearly 100 legal aid organizations around the country, represented these kids, experienced immigration attorneys, people who do this work for a living. But last year, the administration informed them that it was terminating its arrangement. The government told ABC News that it offered the firm an opportunity to receive a new federal contract if they hand over confidential information about the kids and their sponsors. Did you hear that? Information protected by attorney-client privilege. Information that could be potentially used to go after their entire families. Out here in the real world, we call that a shakedown. The lawyers said no, and they kept representing the kids anyway for free for months. Acacia also sued, and last week a federal judge in California ordered the government to pay them. But just days before that ruling, the Trump administration allowed their contract to expire entirely, and that's when they took the opportunity to announce that the Burke Law Group would be defending these tens of thousands of children. But that quickly fell apart after reporters started asking questions and digging around the firm's connections. Burke Law Firm backed out within days. It said it decided not to apply after all. Hey, but it didn't explain why it decided against it. But that is not stopping the Trump administration from recruiting their own guys to represent these kids. Here's the latest. Last week, the administration announced that they had awarded a contract worth up to $244 million to a group that is called Our Rescue. I'd never heard of it. Its current CEO, Derek Benner, is, brace yourselves, a former senior ICE official. You might know Our Rescue by its old name, Operation Underground Railroad. That was a controversial anti-trafficking group. It was the subject of the 2023 movie Sound of Freedom. I don't know if you saw it, but it got a lot of criticism for playing into right-wing conspiracy theories about trafficking and immigration. The group runs sting operations. It's not a legal services organization. It's unclear whether it even has a single immigration lawyer on staff. Its founder, a guy named Tim Ballard, was forced out in 2023 after women accused him of sexual abuse. He denies those allegations. His replacement, Mr. Benner, served in a senior post at ICE under Trump's first term. The man responsible for defending these children from deportation comes from the agency that deports them. If you're sensing a pattern here, Trump-adjacent goons handed the lucrative contracts that they have no business securing, you wouldn't be wrong. There's a watchdog group called the Project on Government Oversight, and it estimates that this administration handed out $625 billion in no-bid contracts last year alone. $625 billion. This year, even more. It's on track, they say, for roughly $300 billion. And according to the Washington Post, the president's own sons invested more than a dozen companies. They invested in these companies that went on to collect over $3 billion in government contracts. This administration has transformed your government into a get-rich-quick scheme, sniffing out any opportunity to enrich themselves and their friends, while most Americans, while you guys are struggling to pay for gas and groceries and rent. Now this firm, Our Rescue, their contract runs through early February. It's unclear what's going to happen next, who's going to represent these kids. That is 24,000 children facing deportation on a deliberately accelerated timeline with no permanent plan for who defends them. Worst of the worst? Give me a break. Michael Lukens, whose organization represented these kids under the old contract, put it bluntly. He told NPR, children are going to be harmed, and that seems to be the point of a lot of these actions. Joining me now are two attorneys who have spent their entire careers doing exactly the work this administration is now handing over to their buds. Lindsay Kozlowski is the co-founder and CEO of the Immigrant Defenders Law Center in Los Angeles. Bridget Cambria is the co-founder and executive director of Aldea, the People's Justice Center. Both of their organizations help represent unaccompanied kids under the contract this administration let expire. I met both of them during the first Trump term, and the work they did to help children who were deliberately separated, tortured, in the words of Physicians for Human Rights, during the family separation policy. Thank you so much for being here. And Bridget, I just want to start with you. It must have been nuts when you learned about who was going to be representing these kids. What was your reaction?
My reaction was concern. The primary concern that all of us as immigration legal service providers have is for our clients. And when your clients are children, they're the most vulnerable people in our system. So to hear that the contract for representing unaccompanied immigrant children was going to be canceled, my concern was, well, who was going to be the attorneys for these children? And what kind of disruption would it cause to children to take someone that they trust who's working on a case and take them away? We're talking about children who are primarily abandoned, abused, neglected, or trafficked. So to have somebody who has worked with a child, gained their trust, gone to court, gone to multiple courts, relived some of the most difficult traumas with children from being an infant to an adolescent, to remove the person that is providing them with instruction and advice, kind of like a parent, to remove that person from them after they have already experienced trauma, it's just compounded trauma.
Did you know anything about any of these people that have been put in the position of doing the work that you would normally do?
No. I know what I and what Lindsay do. We work every day to provide legal services to immigrants. We specialize in providing services to children. It took more than a decade for me to become the professional that I am. And our service providers throughout the country are entirely dedicated to providing the best possible care. And I can guarantee you that when the announcement of the end of the contract came, The primary concern was, what do we do with all of our clients? I don't want to lose my clients. I want to continue to help the children that we represent, and we will. But I can guarantee you that the primary concern for everyone in my organization, but I'm sure everyone throughout the Acacia Network, was how do we ensure continuity of care, and how do we ensure that kids have lawyers when they go to court? Because immigrant kids in the system don't have the right to have an attorney.
That's right.
It is not a guaranteed right.
There's no statute. Yeah.
So every one of these legal service providers are doing it because they care and because they want to. So what we're going to have are kids showing up to court, no lawyer. What does that do to the system? It makes it more difficult for the court system. It makes it more difficult for the immigration system. But primarily, it will cause damage to the children who are in the system. And that might be the goal, right? So at the same time that they're taking away lawyers for kids, they're accelerating and prioritizing children for removal in the system.
Right. And I do think that, I mean, the cruelty is the point, as Adam Serwer said. And that's what Lindsay, other officials told me during the family separation policy. That's when I met you 8 years ago. And you first came to my attention, actually, because I read an article. I think I was down in South Texas. You were talking about being in court with, I think it was like a 3-year-old who couldn't put their feet on the ground, or was alone, no parent, couldn't reach the floor. I think I have that right. Describe for me and the viewers the last time you were in court with a kid in immigration court. Do they understand what's happening to them? How important is it to have someone like you or Bridget by their side?
It's the most important thing for a child in government custody and a child facing deportation to have a lawyer by their side. And what I can tell you is that since our contract lapsed on July 31st, kids have been going to court alone. Our attorneys from within our network witnessed a 7-year-old child taking a final order to leave the United States this week without a lawyer. That should shock every single one of us in the United States that is happening. And you're right to point out that, you and I met during the zero tolerance family separation crisis. It is that crisis that has led us to here, because during that time, it was the network of lawyers representing unaccompanied children who were going into shelters that blew the whistle and made the public aware of what Stephen Miller and the Trump administration were doing the first time around. It was that same network of lawyers that when they tried to load 300 children onto planes in the middle of the night last year and send them to Guatemala with no due process, that stood in their way. That is why they are so afraid of the lawyers. That is why they find us so inconvenient to their plans for mass deportation of children. And, when we look at who they are trying to bring in to replace this network that has spent decades building expertise to protect the rights of children, it is because those organizations are aligned with the Trump administration, because they hope it will be a rubber stamp on these deportations. That is something that should outrage all of us. I know I feel angry, and I hope your viewers, as they start to dig into this and as you dig into it, will feel that outrage. We all have a responsibility to protect children who are vulnerable, who are alone in this country, and what is happening right now should outrage us all. And one last thing to point out about that. In the last 2 weeks, we have seen instances of children who are being abused in government custody. That is one of the reasons that independent, zealous lawyers are so important for kids who are in government custody. We are what stands between children and any kind of abuse happening. We are the ones who point that out when it happens. If a child is being sexually abused or otherwise abused in custody, it is their lawyer who can step in, because we have one interest, and that is the rights of these children. And without independent lawyers meeting with these children, representing them zealously, that abuse will go unchallenged. And that is something none of us can accept.